"You better sign those papers, or we'll dig up Dad and get his fingerprint from the grave." That was the first thing my youngest son said to me after we buried Charles. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Are you holding up okay, Mom?" No, that was the greeting I got. We had just returned from the cemetery. My black dress was still damp from kneeling on the dewy ground, the scent of lilies and turned soil clinging to my sleeves. I stood in the hallway when Scott cornered me like a debt collector, his eyes sharp and his voice low enough that only I could hear the venom. Before I could process what he'd said, Annette barged in behind him, holding a manila envelope. "It's just a minor revision, Mom," she said sweetly, like she was handing me a birthday card. "You know Dad wouldn't want things to get complicated. Let's make this smooth for everyone." David stood a few steps behind them both. He didn't speak. He never did. Just crossed his arms and watched. "Like always. Complicated?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "Your father just died yesterday. You want to talk about money already?" Scott stepped closer. "We're talking about fairness. You think it's fair to leave everything to that dusty veterans group he loved more than his own kids?" I stared at him, and for a brief moment, I didn't recognize his face. I saw nothing of Charles in it, no patience, no decency. Just hunger. "We're your children," Annette added, her voice rising slightly. "You think you can just give it all away and we'll stay quiet?" I walked slowly to the living room and sat in Charles's old recliner, the one that still creaked the same way it had for 40 years. I folded my hands, feeling the edge of my late husband's embroidered handkerchief between my fingers. "My home is wherever you are," he had stitched into the corner back when he still had the steadiness to sew. Annette dropped the envelope on the coffee table like she was throwing down a legal threat. "You can either sign this, or we can contest the will, claim diminished capacity, and let a judge decide if you're all there." Scott laughed under his breath. "You're not getting any younger, Mom." David, still by the wall, finally spoke. "We just want what's fair." I looked at him. My middle son, the one who used to cry when he skinned his knee, and now stood in silence while his siblings threatened me. "David," I asked, "is this how you repay the woman who raised you?" He looked away. Annette's tone turned sharp. "Mom, sign the papers, or we will take this as far as it needs to go." Then Scott, with the calm of someone who had rehearsed it, walked up and laid a hand on my shoulder. "You don't want to fight us on this?" he whispered. "We'll ruin you." I stared at the fireplace where Charles's folded flag rested above the mantel. I could still see the faint imprint of his body on the recliner cushion beside me. I clenched the handkerchief in my palm, feeling the old threads against my skin. I said nothing. Annette scoffed. "This isn't over." They filed out of the house like lawyers leaving a deposition. Cold, efficient. David was the last to leave, his eyes never meeting mine. I sat alone for a long time, the envelope still untouched on the table. The house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the old kitchen clock. Finally, I stood and walked to the bedroom Charles and I had shared for over 50 years. I opened the bottom drawer of his nightstand. Inside was a small wooden box containing a few medals, an old photograph of us from 1969 and a silver USB drive, one Charles had told me to keep safe. I took it to the laptop he had insisted on keeping despite its age. The screen flickered, and then there he was, my Charles, sitting in his reading chair, wearing that flannel I had mended 3 times, staring directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, Liz," he said, his voice steady, "then I guess they came for it." I swallowed hard. "I want you to know I made this decision with a clear mind. I spoke with the lawyer, the doctor. Everything is legal. I'm leaving everything to you, not because I love our kids less, but because they've shown me who they really are. They lied. They sold land behind my back. They stopped calling. They stopped caring. And I cannot reward betrayal with inheritance." He paused, and I saw his eyes shine for a second. "If they threaten you, play this loud. Let them hear it from me." He looked down briefly, then back up. "You were always the only one who stayed, and I trust you to finish this for me." The screen faded to black. I closed the laptop gently, then returned the USB to its box and locked the drawer. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I placed the handkerchief beneath my pillow and lay in silence with Charles's voice still echoing in my mind. If they wanted a war, I now had my weapon. The house creaked more at night now. Maybe it was just age settling into the wood like grief settling into bones. Or maybe it was the silence, the kind that clings to your skin after 50 years of shared footsteps suddenly stop echoing. Charles was gone, and the house knew it. I sat in the kitchen that morning, the chair across from me still pushed slightly out from where he used to sit. His coffee mug, plain white with a crack near the handle, was still on the counter. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. I closed my eyes and let memory carry me back. We were 22 when we bought this land. Just a raw patch of dirt with a broken fence and a shed that leaned like it was ashamed to be standing. Charles had looked at it with that twinkle in his eye, the one that said, "I see what it could be." I had no reason to trust anyone back then, not after the way my own family fell apart. But he put the deed in both our names without asking. "It's ours," he said. "Not mine, not yours, ours." We slept in the back of a pickup for 3 weeks while we rebuilt the cabin. I hammered until my hands bled. He worked until his back locked up. We laughed through it all. One night, it stormed so hard the tarp over us flew off and soaked everything, including Charles's only clean socks. I started to cry, but he pulled me in and said, "At least now we smell like the land we own." That stupid line made me laugh until I forgot the cold. Years passed, and we turned that land into a home. Chickens, then cows, then corn. Charles worked at the mill part-time, and I took in mending work. We never had much, but we had each other. When the kids were born, things got harder but richer. We built rooms, not just walls. We grew roots, and slowly we forgot what silence sounded like. But things changed as they do. The kids grew up and started calling less. First it was school, then work, then, "Life is busy, Mom." I knew the excuses and I never asked for much, a call every now and then, a visit on Sundays. But as the years went on, the voices stopped filling the kitchen. Charles started forgetting things around his 74th birthday. First it was keys, then names, then whole days. The doctor said it was mild cognitive decline, maybe early-stage dementia, maybe just age. But I knew better. I saw the look in his eyes when he stared at the porch swing and asked who built it. He still smiled though, still held my hand every evening and said, "You always smell like home." I stayed with him through every forgotten moment. I helped him bathe, helped him eat. I cleaned up the accidents and hid the bills from the kids because I knew he would have done the same for me. One night, after he got lost on the way to the shed, I found him sitting in the field looking at the stars. He whispered, "If I go before you, Liz, everything should go to you." He looked down at the grass and then at me. "Because they love what I have, but you loved who I was." He never said it again, but I knew he meant it. 3 days before his heart surgery, Charles asked me to help him set up the camera in the study. He looked pale, but his mind was sharp. "If anything happens, this video will speak for me," he said, and it did. A few weeks after that, when Charles had a particularly lucid day, we went to town. I helped him into his best shirt, the blue one with the pearl buttons, and drove him to Robert Blackwell's office. Robert had been our family's lawyer for decades. But more than that, he was Charles's friend. They'd fought together in Korea, knew each other's secrets and morals. We sat in Robert's office while Charles spelled out every word he wanted in his will. No confusion, no pressure, just clarity. Leave the house, the land, the bank accounts, all of it to Liz. And when she's gone, it can go wherever she wants. I trust her. Robert nodded and said it would be drafted that day. Just to be safe. We called Dr. Mason, our town's only doctor, and another man who had known Charles for years. Dr. Mason came to the office, gave Charles a full cognitive screening, and wrote a formal statement on the spot. Mistuck. Charles Walker is mentally capable of understanding and signing legal documents as of this date. I still have the signed copy, sealed, witnessed, stamped. That day, after everything was finished, Charles took my hand as we walked back to the car and said, "That's my final act of love for you, Lids. They will come for it. But you'll be ready." It was 2 days after the funeral when Annette came knocking again, dressed in charcoal gray and pearls, as if still in mourning. But the gleam in her eye gave her away. Behind her stood a man I'd never seen before. Tall, with slicked back hair, and the kind of smile that smelled like commission. He held a leather briefcase and wore a suit too shiny for someone truly successful. "Mom," Annette said brightly, like we'd just met for brunch. "This is Mr. Thomas Clay. He's here to help us streamline some paperwork." I said nothing, stepping aside. I had already learned it was easier to let the fox enter the henhouse when you had a trap set. "Mr. Clay," shook my hand with a practiced grip. "My deepest, your husband was a great man. You knew him?" I asked. "Oh, no," he said quickly. "But I've heard wonderful things. They followed me into the kitchen. I had already prepared the room. Tidy, warm, and deceptively innocent. The tea kettle was on the stove. A plate of cornbread sat on the table. But what mattered most was the small brass teapot sitting on the shelf beside the window. Inside, tucked carefully between the leaves of mint tea, was a miniature camera. A gift from Robert Blackwell, who had dropped it off quietly the day before. "This won't take long," Annette said, pulling out a thick folder from her bag. She set it on the table and slid it toward me. "It's just an update. The last will was made under emotional circumstances. We all agree it's time to ensure fairness." A Scot came in through the back door without knocking. "You said she'd be ready," he grumbled. "Is she signing or not?" I sat down slowly and stared at the folder as if it were a viper coiled on my table. "What is this?" "New will," Annette said with rehearsed ease. "Nothing drastic. Just a few changes to make sure everything is distributed equitably. You'll still keep the house. We're just removing the charity clause and adjusting the percentages." I ran my hand along the edge of the table, letting my fingers rest on the warm ceramic of my teacup. "Oh, come on," Scott barked. "He's practically a relic. This is standard legal procedure. Don't complicate things." Mr. Clay smiled again. "We're here as a courtesy, Mom. If you'd rather have your attorney review it, we can always return, but your children are just trying to protect your interests." I leaned forward, picked up the first page, and held it like it might burn me. My hands trembled, partly from nerves, partly from deliberate theater. I let the paper shake. "I don't know if I can read this," I whispered. "Says I give." "What does it say, dear?" I looked to Annette, blinking like I couldn't make out the words. She leaned in with sugar in her voice. "It just says that you're redistributing assets among your children. That's all. We can read it together." I frowned, squinting harder. "So the land goes to David, and the livestock to Walker. Again, that's Scott," Annette said quickly. "Oh, I see. And the savings, who does that go to?" I looked up. "To be divided equally." Even with that loan David never repaid. The air went still for a moment. Scott's jaw tightened. "That's ancient history." I shrugged, then looked at Mr. Clay. "And you're a lawyer." "I am a licensed financial consultant who works closely with estate attorneys." "Meaning you're not a lawyer," I said more sharply than I had intended. "That's what I thought." He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I assure you everything here is legal." "Oh, I'm sure it is," I said, softening my voice again. The next morning, I woke early and prepared myself once more. In my pocket, tucked into the inner seam, was a small digital voice recorder, no bigger than a matchbox. Robert had lent it to me the night before. "If they come again," he'd said, "let them talk, but this time, let the law listen too." By noon, they returned. Scott entered first, holding the door open for Annette like they were arriving at a hotel, not their late father's home. "Mom," she said crisply. "We thought we'd check in one last time. Give you a chance to do the right thing before we move forward." "Just as today," Scott added, tossing his coat over the chair like he owned it. "Thought it'd be better without Mr. Clay, less pressure. More family, family." The word scraped across my spine. I nodded politely, offered them tea, and sat at the far end of the kitchen table, the voice recorder already running in my pocket. Annette got straight to the point. "Here's what we're thinking. You keep the house, one car. The rest we split evenly. Land, investments, all of it. We'll even handle the paperwork and fees. You won't have to lift a finger." A Scot leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Look, we're not trying to be cruel. We just want our share. And if you drag this out, things could get uncomfortable." I tilted my head slightly. "Uncomfortable?" He smiled, but there was no kindness in it. "You live alone, Mom. Winter's coming. What happens if the heater goes out and no one's there to fix it? Or if the road freezes over and you slip getting the mail? We'll worry about you," Annette added. "Truly. But if you won't let us help, we'll have to petition the court for power of attorney. Then we can make the changes on your behalf." I sipped my tea and said nothing. Let the silence hang like a curtain. That was when Scott's voice dropped low and vicious. "If you don't sign, we'll leave you here to rot. You'll die in this house. And no one will even know until the smell leaks through the floorboards." Annette flinched, but she didn't stop him. He kept going. "You think you're clever, hoarding Dad's money like some dragon. We'll burn every trace of him if we have to. His medals, his grave. You hear me? If I don't see a dime, I swear I'll dig up his body and toss it to the dogs." My grip tightened on the teacup, but I stayed silent. I didn't let them see my hands shake. I looked past them at the worn patch of wallpaper above the stove where Charles had once scribbled the measurements for a new kitchen shelf. He never built it. He got sick before he could finish. But he left the numbers there like a promise. And I thought to myself, let the walls remember this. Let every word be a nail in their own coffin. Scott stood up. Enough talk. Sign the papers, or we go to court tomorrow. I smiled then, a soft, slow smile. The kind I used to give Charles after a particularly good hand of cards. I'll think about it, I said gently. You should go now. When they were gone, I waited until the driveway was empty before reaching into my pocket and pulling out the recorder. I rewound it, pressed play, and let the venom pour from its tiny speaker. Scott's voice was crisp and clear. If you don't sign, we'll leave you here to rot. I swear I'll dig up his body and toss it to the dogs. I closed my eyes, hearing Charles in my mind. Not his anger, for he was never one for rage, but his calm certainty. Let them speak. He'd told me once back when we were young and battling a neighbor who tried to claim part of our fence line. The truth always knows the way home. The next morning, I bundled up in my heaviest coat, slipped the USB and voice recorder into a cloth pouch, and locked the house behind me. I drove to the law office of Robert Blackwell. Robert had been Charles's closest friend for more than 5 decades. They met in Korea, both barely men then, but already brothers in some unspoken way. Over the years, their friendship aged like good whiskey. Quiet, strong, and always waiting when it mattered most. When I walked into the reception area, Robert's assistant looked up with a startled smile. Mrs. Walker, she said, standing. He's expecting you. Robert's office had barely changed since the 90s. Same leather chairs, same ticking grandfather clock in the corner. Same faint smell of cedar and pipe tobacco, even though he'd quit smoking years ago. Liz, he said with a small nod. You look like hell. I smiled weakly. Good. That's how I feel. I placed the pouch on his desk and unwrapped it with slow, deliberate care. They came back, I said. With a fake will, a phony lawyer, and a handful of threats. I set the USB on the wood. Charles was right. They didn't waste a day. Robert took the drive and the recorder in his large hands, then looked at me. Did they pressure you to sign anything? They tried. I played dumb. I stalled. I recorded everything. It's all there. The threats, the manipulation. Scott talking about digging up Charles's grave. Annette trying to rewrite the will behind closed doors. He slid on his reading glasses and leaned back. And the original will? In your files, I said. And this. I pulled out the doctor's letter, still folded neatly in the envelope Charles had asked me to hide. Charles passed his mental competency evaluation the same day he signed the will. Witnessed, verified. Robert opened the letter, read it silently, then let out a long breath. This, he said, is airtight. We spent the next 2 hours assembling every piece of proof, printing legal documents, and organizing them into labeled binders. Robert made backup copies and stored them in a locked drawer. He even gave me a flash drive to carry on my keychain just in case. Here is what we do, Robert said. I will draft a letter of legal warning citing the original will, the video testimony, the competency evaluation, and the audio recording. We will send it to each of your children with an official notice of cease and desist. Any further attempt to coerce you will be considered elder abuse under Tennessee law. If they push, we sue publicly. You think they'll stop? I asked. Robert shrugged. Some people turn tail when they see the barrel of a lawsuit. Others don't know they've lost until they're standing in front of a judge. Either way, we don't wait for their next move. We make ours first. Before I left, he walked me to the car. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting pale gold light over the quiet street. You're not alone, he said, hand on the car door. And you're not powerless, I looked at him. Old friend of my husband, and whispered, thank you. For Charles? Robert nodded, on for you. They came back on a Thursday. No call, no warning. Just the slamming of car doors and the echo of boots on the porch. I had just finished sweeping the hallway when I saw them through the front window. They didn't knock. They barged in like they still lived there, like this house didn't reek of their betrayal. You forced our hand, Mom? Annette said sharply. We're done playing nice. Scott didn't wait for pleasantries. We've already spoken to a lawyer. If you keep pushing this fantasy, we'll take you to court ourselves. I stood at the end of the dining table, wiping my hands on a dish towel. On what grounds? A Scott sneered. Mental manipulation. Elder abuse. We'll tell the judge you pressured Dad into writing that will while he was already slipping. You're accusing me? I said slowly. Of courting my husband while he was ill, David mumbled. You isolated him. You didn't let us help. You never tried, I snapped. Not once. Annette raised her voice, her cheeks flushed. You want to die alone in this house with your dusty memories. Fine. But you don't get to take everything with you. We're not leaving empty-handed. Then Scott stepped forward, eyes blazing. We'll tell the local paper everything. We'll say you took advantage of a confused old man. They'll eat it up. Headlines, photos. You think you'll survive that? Tragedy turns to scandal real fast. His words didn't shake me. Not this time. I walked to the hutch and opened the small wooden drawer. From it, I retrieved a slim black device and returned to the table without a word. I placed it gently on the wood. The light blinked red. Annette took a half step back. What's that? I sat down, centered the recorder, and pressed play. The room filled with their own voices, sharp, vile, inescapable. If you don't sign, we'll leave you here to rot. I swear I'll dig up his body and toss it to the dogs. We'll bury you before you bury the money. Sound of my silence between their threats was louder than anything they said. David turned pale. Annette's jaw twitched as she stared at the table. Scott's face turned red, not from shame, only fury. He lunged forward, arm raised, hand stretched toward the recorder like he meant to crush it. But before he could touch it, a calm voice cut through the air. That would be considered destruction of evidence, Mr. Walker. All three of them froze. From behind the hallway curtain, Robert Blackwell stepped out, suit pressed, expression unreadable. He carried a folder under one arm and a heavy badge of truth in the other. Scott stumbled backward, his bravado crumbling. You set us up. No, Robert said. Walking to set yourselves up. Mrs. Walker simply gave you the rope. You tied the noose. Annette's eyes filled with panic. This isn't legal. We didn't know we were being recorded. In the state of Tennessee, Robert said smoothly, only one party needs to be aware of an audio recording for it to be admissible in court. And that party was your mother. He opened his folder and removed a letter, sliding it across the table toward them. This is a cease and desist order signed by Judge Wallace this morning. Any further attempt to intimidate or defraud Mrs. Walker will result in formal charges. You are no longer allowed on this property without her written consent. No one spoke, not even David. I looked at each of them, my children, my flesh, my heartbreak, and felt nothing. Not rage, not sorrow, just stillness. You came here to finish me, I said, voice low. But all you did was finish yourselves. A Scott muttered something foul and turned on his heel. Annette hesitated, her mouth moving, but no words coming. David looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time in years. Then followed them out the door. Robert waited until the sound of their car faded down the gravel drive before turning to me. You all right? He asked gently. I nodded once. Better than I've been in a long time. The courtroom was cold, the kind of cold that sank into your bones and made you feel smaller than you were. I sat at the front, hands folded in my lap, that old handkerchief with Charles's embroidery tucked between my fingers. My home is wherever you are. I could still feel the worn stitching brushing against my palm as if his hand rested there, steadying me. Scott, Annette, and David sat a few feet away, lined up like schoolchildren awaiting discipline. Their lawyer, a slick, talking man in an expensive suit, was already sweating through his collar. Judge Evelyn Wallace entered the courtroom with the calm authority of someone who had seen too many families torn apart over too little truth. Robert stood tall beside me, files in hand, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose. We are here today to affirm the validity of the last will and testament of Charles Walker. Judge Wallace began, scanning the room, and to address allegations brought by the plaintiffs, his children, regarding coercion, mental incompetence, and fraudulent exclusion. Robert stepped forward and began in his calm, deliberate voice. Your Honor, what we have before us is not just a legal dispute. It is an effort to undo the final, conscious, and lawfully prepared wishes of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He turned to the courtroom technician. With your permission, I'd like to submit into evidence a recorded video made by Mr. Walker 2 weeks before his passing. The judge nodded. Proceed. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen lit up. And there he was, Charles, sitting in his favorite reading chair, wearing that blue flannel shirt I had folded so many times. His voice filled the courtroom, quiet but resolute. If you're watching this, it means they've tried to take what I've left behind. I closed my eyes and listened to my husband speak from beyond the grave, his words becoming my shield, his love becoming my strength. The truth, as Charles always said, had found its way home.